Everything in the natural world can be explained by math, and that includes attraction and dating dynamics. If you're an average to below average looking man trying to date women in 2025, good luck, because I've run the numbers and, well, the numbers are not in your favor. Women are extremely selective when it comes to choosing men, and that's because they can be. There's been multiple studies done on this topic, but the most well known study is one from 2019 that found that men swipe right on 61.9% of female profiles, while women only swipe right on 4.5% of men's profiles. And by the way, swiping right basically just means that they liked the profile. And like I said, there's been several different studies done on this topic. Like, there was one that showed that men swipe right on 40% of women and women swipe right on 7% of men. And there's another one that showed that men swipe right on 46% of women while women swipe right on 14% of men, which is slightly less extreme, but still. They've done all of these studies on dating apps and they all show the same result. The numbers might vary slightly here and there, but the conclusion is always the same. And that conclusion is women are extremely selective and most men are desperate. And the thing is, it actually would be fine for women to be hyper selective like that, only being attracted to 5% of men. That would be fine if every woman was attracted to a different 5% of men, because then most men would still have some women attracted to them. But we all know that's not how it works. In reality, it's the same 5% of men that all women are attracted to. If you had a group of 100 men and you asked 20 women to pick all the guys they find attractive out of that group, even if each woman only selected 5 of the men, as long as there was a lot of variation on which 5 men each woman chose, most of the men in that 100-man group would have at least one woman that finds him attractive. But in reality, if you actually ran this experiment, there might be a little bit of variation in which men the women choose, but ultimately, you'd end up with probably, at most, like 15 of the men having been selected. So being selective isn't the problem. It's okay to have preferences, and it's okay to be a bit picky about who you're attracted to. But when you have virtually every woman in the world all being very selective, and they all select the exact same men, now you've got a problem. That is a problem. And it's a big one. It's like a math equation that just doesn't work out. So let's think about this for a second, and let's crunch some numbers. If you live in an area with a dating market consisting of 1 million people, so for simplicity's sake, let's just say there's 500,000 men and 500,000 women, and if we're being generous, we could say that women are attracted to about 10% of those men. So out of the 500,000 men in this dating market, only 50,000 of them actually have any hope of finding a partner. But out of all the 500,000 women in the dating market, assuming men find, let's say, 50% of them attractive, that means there's 250,000 women that men actually want to date, and there's 50,000 attractive men for those 250,000 women to choose from. And there's something important you need to keep in mind here. Generally speaking, because every person is an individual, so this is just in general, but generally speaking, women only want to date one man, while men want to sleep with as many women as they possibly can. So because of how the numbers work out, since there's 250,000 so-called attractive women and only 50,000 so-called attractive men, what happens is the men that women desire are so rare that women will put up with anything in order to land one of those men. And when I say they'll put up with anything, that means these women will willingly date a man while being fully aware of the fact that he is also dating 5 other women at the same time. And they'll do that because they're hoping eventually that man will choose her as the one. So, in that hypothetical dating market of 500,000 men and 500,000 women, there are 250,000 women that are actually dateable, but they all willingly share the same 50,000 men, while the other 450,000 men are left lonely and desperate. And here's another key difference between men and women that makes all of this even worse. Of those 450,000 lonely, desperate, undesirable men, probably at least 90% of them would be willing to settle for one of the 250,000 undesirable women in that dating market. Especially as time goes by, the longer a man goes without intimacy, the lower he is willing to stoop to get some. And trust me, I know that firsthand. But those 250,000 undesirable women in that dating market, the vast majority of them, they won't settle. They will not compromise on their attraction. And there's a few reasons for that. One reason is because a not insignificant portion of those women will occasionally manage to hook up with men from that top 10%, top 50,000 group. Because men are attracted to novelty. So some of those 50,000 high-value men, they're gonna roll around in the pig pen from time to time, just so they can experience something new. So those so-called undesirable women, they still get their validation from the top 10% of men. And see, validation is huge for women. Men need validation too. It's a natural human trait to crave validation. But for women, validation is one of, if not the most important driving force pushing them into romantic relationships in the first place. In the same way that men crave sex, women crave validation, and they crave attention. And the bottom 50% undesirable women do not need any of the bottom 90% of undesirable men in order to get that attention and validation that they crave. So at the end of this long, complex math equation, if you remember to carry the one, subtract x from both sides, and yada yada yada, what we get at the end of all this ciphering, there are 50,000 happy, satisfied men that are living the dream, getting exactly what they want. And there's 500,000 women that are maybe not all living their dream life, but they are at least content and feeling validated. And then there's 450,000 men, so 90% of the men and 45% of the total population that are living lives of utter despair, crippling loneliness, just living a life that is barely worth living. And for most of those men, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Most of them are not going to ascend. They're never going to rise up and be part of that top 10% group. And forget about the numbers I've been throwing out, like 50,000 men, 250,000 women, whatever. That's just an example calculation I wanted to use so we could maybe get a better sense of scale. But if you just focus on the percentages, because those percentages are actually how it plays out in whatever dating market you exist in, 10% of men are living like Genghis Khan, essentially operating their own personal harems, while 90% of men are lonely and they're missing out on one of their base level needs. I mean, look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but basically Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a visual guide depicting all of a human's basic needs. And the way it works, needs lower on the pyramid are more fundamental And the basic idea is that you have to meet your needs at a lower level before you can even hope to fulfill your needs at the next level up. So you can't fulfill your needs for esteem until you've met your needs for love and belonging. But before you can attempt to fulfill your needs for love and belonging, you have to first meet your safety needs, and so on. I think you get it. So just look at this. The most basic level of needs, physiological needs. That includes things like the basic needs for air, water, and food, but it also includes reproductive needs. And you can see that 2 levels up is the love and belonging category, which includes needs for romantic relationships, affection, and intimacy. So that is a bit confusing, but from my quick research, it looks like Abraham Maslow himself did clarify that sex belongs in the physiological needs category. So, yeah. And I would even argue that, and I know this might be controversial to some, but I would argue that for men, sex is absolutely a physiological need, and it should for sure be included at that most base level on the hierarchy. You know, the drive for sex really is like hunger for men, and without it, we cannot hope to find any comfort in this life. But for women, sex is a lot less important, I think. It might still reside at that most basic level on the hierarchy of needs, but a woman forced into celibacy really isn't going to be suffering the same way that a man will, generally speaking, of course. But yeah, so back to the point, 90% of men, maybe more, are not even able to meet literally their most base level needs. Fundamental, biological requirements for survival. Upwards of 90% of men are not even able to fulfill their fundamental biological requirements for survival. Requirements for survival. Are you paying attention to what I'm saying? This is what the male loneliness epidemic is. We cannot survive like this. And all the boomers and older folks that were grandfathered into their relationships by virtue of living their lives before the internet fucked us, they don't care. And they don't see the problem. They don't believe it. They can't comprehend it. And women don't care. And the top 10% of men, they don't care. Why would they? Their needs are met. They're just on top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just dancing on top of the pyramid, just fucking moonwalking or doing the stanky leg or whatever the fuck kind of dancing people do these days. And they got a harem of Stacys right there next to them doing synchronized pirouettes or whatever. So they don't care. They're not going to help us. Nobody is going to help us. Nobody's coming to save you. And I don't think there's even a solution to this. I mean, I don't know. Maybe AI girlfriends is the best possible future we can hope for, but I don't want that. I want a real human woman. 90% of men. And I don't see things getting any better either. You know, I'm trying to raise a baby boy into a man. And I want him to thrive. I don't want him to be suffering. I don't want him to struggle. I want him to make it past the first and most basic fucking level of human needs. But all the cards are stacked against him. He's got my pinhead ass as his guardian. And I mean, 90%. Only 10% of men make it. 10%. Those aren't good odds. And I'm here crying my eyes out over this because this is real shit right here. Meanwhile, Chad next door can't even hear his own thoughts over the sound of some random Tinder girl moaning in his ear. And it'll probably be a different girl tomorrow and then a whole another girl the night after that. So please, Somebody get Neil deGrasse Tyson, or I don't know, some fucking mathematician, get to work on this problem. The Higgs boson can wait. That's minuscule. That is a minuscule issue. The male loneliness epidemic is happening right now. And this shit is macroscopic. And yes, it is a matter of survival for a whole lot of men out there, 90 fucking percent. So please, somebody, make the math work. Figure it out. Balance the equation. Do what you have to do. Because right now, we have upwards of 90% of the male population barely surviving. And 90% of all men. That's a hell of a lot of people. So yeah, it's a big fucking problem.